What do you do with the wait in the waiting? And I brought this out because wait and wait sound similar but are spelled differently. I want to talk about the WEIGHT in the waiting. When I talk about waiting, what I mean is, that space between when you've heard that God will do something and then when he actually does it, that in between period where you're waiting for the realization of the promise. And in that period, it's very interesting. Several things can happen that can make us believe that God is not going to come through. Some of us, it could just be historical disappointments that sort of inform or frame our future. So we're concerned and we don't want to get disappointed. So we choose not to believe. For some of us, it's just the fact that we have to wait and then we're concerned that maybe God won't come through. All of these things and more can actually add a lot of emotional weight. And I want to talk about that waiting period where you're lifting up or you feel like you're carrying this weight of, will God ever come through? There's a lady in the Bible by the name of Sarah. You're probably very familiar with this passage. For the sake of time, I won't read it. But if you go to Genesis chapter 18, you'll read the story. You see, Abraham is sitting outside in the tent. It's an extremely hot day, and the Bible makes sure that it lets us know that this was a hot day. So it lets us know that the fact that Abraham will stand up and actually notice that there are three strangers out coming toward him, and he runs to them, means he inconvenienced himself to be hospitable to them. Of course, we find out later that those three strangers are actually, one of them is the Lord, which scholars will call a theophany. And in conversation with them as they're eating, one of them looks to Abraham and says, "Where is your wife, Sarah?" And of course, Sarah, now this, of course, we find out this is the Lord speaking, and God knows where Sarah is, but he says that, I believe, so that he can pique Sarah's interest. And so Sarah now, who is in the tent, is overhearing this conversation. Her interest is piqued. And then he says to Abraham, by this time next year, I'm going to give you a son. If you're unfamiliar with the story, Sarah and Abraham are old and they have been trusting God for a son, for a child. And so at this point, Sarah's internal response to this thing that she's hearing is, right now, when I'm in menopause, like long past menopause, you're going to give me a son? That is unbelievable. Like, she basically responds in disbelief, but in her own ears. And then the visitor, who is the Lord, says, why does Sarah laugh? Because Sarah does laugh when she's in the back room listening to this conversation. And then he says, listen, this time next year, you're going to carry a baby. You're going to have a son. And of course, that's what's happened in chapters later. But here's what I want to tell you. When God was coming, he was coming so that Sarah could receive that promise for herself. And I can say this confidently because in previous chapters, God has an encounter with Abraham where he gives Abraham a promise. And it says Abraham believed the Lord. So Abraham's issue wasn't that he doubted that God wouldn't do it. At this juncture, I believe God came to visit Sarah. And God is coming to some of you, and I believe he wants to awaken hope. He wants to put into you hope. And the way he's doing it is by giving you a promise. Even though probably in your mind, you're probably saying like, there's no way this can happen. There's absolutely no way this can happen. Look at the conditions of my circumstances, or look at where I am in my station in life. And God is saying, I can still work through. But what I want us to remember in this, and how do we navigate the wait? Again, the wait during the waiting period where we're trusting God to do what he said he would do, is I want you to know that God cradles the promise he's given to you in his power. Meaning that during that wait period when you don't see anything going on, God is working and he is cradling your promise like a newborn baby being held by its mother. And the mother is speaking to that baby and just adoring that baby, that God is holding your promise. I can say this because he gives this promise to Sarah. And then happens in chapter 18. And then in chapter 20, Sarah and Abraham are continuing on their journey, and they come into a town where they meet someone by the name of Abimelech. Abimelech is the king of that area. And so Abraham, in fear that they're going to kill him because Sarah has it going on, she's a beautiful woman, even in her old age, tells Sarah, and he says, listen, just tell them you're my sister. So, of course, Sarah does that. And, of course, Abimelech says, well, I'm going to take you for my wife because she's a beautiful woman. But what ends up happening is that Abimelech, before he even does anything with Sarah, has a dream. And God tells Abimelech, this is all in chapter 20. He says, listen, you're a dead man if you touch that woman. And he says, but I haven't done anything. I was told that was his sister. And God says, yes, I know. That's why I haven't done anything to you. You need to let her go. And she's not his sister. That is his wife. and you need to release her. And of course, Abimelech has a conversation with Abraham. He releases Sarah back to Abraham, and he actually blesses them. But here's the point to what I'm saying, is that because God had given Sarah a promise, God protected Sarah. God protected his promise. He cradled that promise with his power. That's why I believe Abimelech even had that dream. I don't know what you're believing for, and I have no idea how long that wait is. But whatever it is, having the mindset that during this waiting period, that even though it feels overwhelming to wait, to wonder, that God is cradling your promise. God is cradling it with his power. When you begin to think that way, it begins to transform your response in the waiting period. So again, I just want to encourage you. God has a promise for you. He connects it to his word. And in that moment, when you're waiting to see what God will do, would you just also believe that God is cradling the promise he has given you with his power? God bless you.